Get you some updates on our friends, talk about how Creep I.E went, and The Breeding by Avily Jerome. All that and more on this week's Indie Author Showcase. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, multi-award-winning author Chad Robert Morgan. Let's get to it. First, let's get some updates from some friends of the show. First of all, good friend of the show, Scott Harper. He is now writing the stories behind a Series E comic books from Scary Tales Publishing. First two issues of Monsters vs. Mobsters are out. These are a little bit bigger than the average comic book size. I met the author at WonderCon. Or sorry, not the author. I met the artist at WonderCon. And I was like, hey, those comic books look a little bit familiar. I think I've seen those before. But Scott Harper, our vampire author extraordinaire, he's the one that is pinning the stories behind all these comic books. And from what I've heard, they're getting really good reception. So feel free to check those out. On top of that, our friends over at Halloween, the book is now up on Audible. So for those that didn't get a chance to get the book, to see TT's great artwork, which I don't know how that translates to the Audible so well, might be worth getting the book just to see her artwork, to be honest. But for those that maybe don't have much time to read, or maybe want to encourage their kids to read and have the audiobook to follow along to, it is now available on Audible. And Doug Brode, author of Shelley, has been posting on his social media that Shelley is now #1 in sci-fi on Amazon. So congratulations to him. We're actually talking with Doug about maybe and with Josh actually about maybe doing a special episode where we talk a bit about marketing. I've been reaching out to one or two other authors to join that podcast episode. I think it would be great if we had a big round table and had like a bunch of different viewpoints on what people are doing and what works and what doesn't work for them. So I'm working on that. Haven't quite got it put together yet, but we'll see how that goes. Speaking on how things goes, I speak English goodly. Speaking on things going well, let's talk about Creep I.E. Aftermath. Now, Creep I.E. Aftermath is the off-season version of the show. The one that was just in late January, early February was off the hook. It was busy as sin. It was huge success. Creep I.E. Aftermath last year was a bit of a letdown. A lot of the people felt that it underperformed. And the runners of the show felt that they were kind of running contrary to too many other events, and that was taken away from their audience. It also didn't help that last Creep I.E. Aftermath, they really didn't have too many strong, huge celebrities, right? Because that's how the conventions work. You get the celebrities that come to see the celebrities, and they wander on to see the vendors. They're not coming to see me, right? I am basking in the glory that is all the celebrities, right? I'm taking their spillover, basically, as all the other vendors are. That's just how these things work. The better celebrities you got, the more crowds you're going to attract, the better the vendors are going to do. Generally, that's how that works. Friday was better than a normal Friday. Now, Fridays are always slow. People are getting off work. They're meandering in, that kind of thing. So Fridays I don't do well, but I did better than I have done in Fridays past. So I was feeling very bullish. Saturday, the morning was off the hook. I was doing great. I was on track on making my projections in terms of sales. And then halfway through, everybody disappeared. We're like, what in the... Turns out they had done all the photo ops all at the same time, and that sucked all the attendees out of the conference hall. So they all went in line to go get their picture taken with the celebrity. So they sent out an email saying that this was the best Creep I.E. aftermath they've had. They had some really good celebrities for this off-season show. Some really nice headliners. In fact, they had like the entire like cast of Chucky, or maybe not the entire cast, but definitely a lot of the major players in Chucky in the franchise, including the TV series. They had people from like Christopher Lloyd was there from Back to the Future. Um, some really noticeable names, right? So that was a huge draw. In fact, at the end of the show, I went to go take a look because again, there was nobody to sell books to. Nobody was there, and the whole place was empty except for where you could meet the original voice actor of Chucky. Everybody was there because they wanted to meet him, right? Nobody else mattered at that point. Even a lot of the other celebrities were kind of like idle because everybody was there to meet him. Um, for a con goer, this was a huge success, right? For a con runner, this was a huge success. For a vendor, not so much. Like I said, when all the attendees just sort of disappear at once, I can't sell books over at the autograph tables, you know? So yeah, some of the other vendors were voicing similar complaints that they did not do as well this time. I mean, they were getting the people in the door. They just weren't funneling them through to where the vendors could make money. Because again, if the vendors don't make money, the vendors don't come next year. The vendors don't come next year, um, then you don't have vendors, and then the thing starts to die. So I mean, you need the celebrities, right? That's priority number one. They nailed that. But you also got to keep the vendors happy. So it's a weird balancing act that was a little out of balance in this show. Um, again, if you're a con attendee, if you're a horror fan, you would have loved this. This would be right up your alley. This was a great show. Just as somebody who has to make the booth fees and has to sell enough books to cover the cost of the booth, it didn't work out quite as well as I hoped. But that's just me. But the con itself was great. Speaking of, I am attending the first ever Sinister book fair. So Sinister Creature Con is a convention up in Sacramento. Now, I've not attended this. I've heard from Grapevine, from other vendors, that this is a very good convention, that this does well. Haven't seen for myself. I've been trying to get in to check it out or to attend, but they said, hey, we're doing something different in September 27th, a one-day event. We are going to do a horror-themed book fair. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. All right. Table fees were dirt cheap. In fact, it's going to cost me more money to drive up there and drive back than to actually attend this event. This event is just dirt cheap, which is great because I'm broke. Will it work? Will it not work? I don't know. It's the first time it's ever been done. So there's no basis for comparison. We don't know how well this thing performs because it's never there's no history to go back on. So the showrunners have reportedly been doing a very successful show up there. So they should have a huge customer base that they can, a huge email list they can tap onto and everything like that. So I'm fingers crossed that this will do at least well enough to warrant driving up and down the state and selling. I mean, it's $100 table fee. I should be able to make that back in I mean, even with everybody going to go see the voice of Chucky and abandoning us vendors, they still managed to almost make booth fees. And booth fees at Creep I.E. are like It is possible that absolutely nobody shows up and I have nobody to sell to, and I'm out $100. But I can risk $100. That's not really a huge concern. So I'm excited. I'm anxious to try this. Hoping it will go well. And if it doesn't go well, I got family up there. We're gonna go up a little early. We're gonna spend time with the fam, and then we're gonna come back down. So if it doesn't work out, well, at least I get some family time. So that's good too. That's all the news and updates. I don't really have anything else planned for this episode in terms of issues going on in the industry or anything like that. So let's get straight to the showcase. Today's showcase is The Breeding by Avily Jerome. I met this lady over at Hellmouth Con, and she was one of the two indie authors that I hadn't met before that were there, and I snagged her books, and this was the first one that I was able to get to because fortunately it was on Audible. We'll get to that, put a pin on that. So let's start with the blurb on Amazon, or the blurb on the back of the book. Jack might be crazy, but maybe the demons in her head are real. Detective Jack Davidson thinks she went crazy the night her fiancé died in a car crash. Monsters no one else can see or hear cause her constant torment. All logic insists the monsters are byproducts of her trauma, yet she can't shake the hunch that her hallucinations aren't all in her head. Then she discovers that what she's experiencing is somehow related to her fiancé's last case. When she investigates, she uncovers a plot that involves human trafficking and babies that may not be completely human. In order to save more women from being taken, Jack has to accept that the demons in her head might actually be real. Just as she thinks she's getting closer to answers, her most powerful enemy targets her best friend. Now Jack must fight against the forces of hell itself to stop her city from being taken over while trying to protect her best friend. But how can she stop something no one else believes is real? Real Realms 2019 finalist, Parable Awards 2019 finalists, and Realm Makers Book of the Year finalists. So we have ourselves an award winner here. What did I like about the book? It starts off really strong. She has checked herself into a mental hospital because she's hearing voices and they're attacking her and all that kind of good stuff. They're trying to keep her in the mental hospital. They don't want her to get out. Once she gets out, she starts investigating what's going on, trying to get some answers. She also starts developing a bit of a love triangle with this doctor and a pastor, which was a very interesting dynamic. Put a pin on that for a second. Um, all in all, this was really, really good in terms of the characterization, um, the way it's written, because it's all written from her first person perspective. The characters felt really real. I was engrossed. I enjoyed the book in spite of the parts that I didn't think worked quite as well. So let's get into that. First thing is, as I mentioned before, I listened to this on Audible. The audiobook had some serious errors in it. I'm talking several times where lines were repeated. There was one chapter that was cut in half. I would recommend getting this as a hard copy and reading it. I do not think the audiobook was doing the book justice. This is a book that should be read and not listened to unless the audiobook. Now, let me say a little bit about fixing up your audiobook, because I've had similar problems with my audiobook. I remember the first time I put mine out and so, oh yeah, I reviewed it. It's really good. This is still a work in progress, right? No, this is final. Oh, well, because I heard some errors. I'm like, oh, quick, write it down. When you are, at least last time I had to do it, maybe it's changed since then, in all fairness, because I haven't had to upload an audiobook in about a year. It takes me about a year to do a book, right? So maybe the process has been cleaned up a bit. But when I had to re-upload a book from Audible to Audible, I couldn't just upload the chapters that I fixed. I had to re-upload the entire audiobook. And the process of uploading your corrections is completely different than when you were uploading it for the first time. It was so user unfriendly and such a pain in the butt. And you had to go through the strict naming convention and all this kind of, it was weird. I've had to do that like twice. So it really behooves you to make sure all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted on the audiobook. You need to go through that a couple of times. You need to get some other people to listen to it a couple of times. It is not, last time I had to do it, it was not an easy process to update an audiobook on Audible. So yeah, you're really motivated to get that right. The narrator didn't work for me very well, and like I said, there were some serious issues. One chapter was just towards the end was just cut in half. So get the novel and sit down and read it. I would skip the audiobook on this one, to be fair. The book ends in a cliffhanger. She's not the only author to do this. This is a trend with people that are writing series. I am not a fan of the, let's call it the J.R.R. Tolkien way of doing a series. What I mean by that is, if you read The Lord of the Rings, it reads like one giant book, right? You get to the end of the Fellowship of the Rings, and it just sort of stops. You get to the end of the Two Towers, and it just sort of stops, right? And that sort of has given permission to do that when you're writing a series. And again, she's not the only person to do this. I've seen several authors take this approach where they just write, and they're like, this is a good place to stop, and just, and then it continues on next week. Now, we talked about this. There's a term for this. I'm blanking on the term right now, but it basically, the idea that there's unfinished business, and that's going to motivate you to keep going. We do this when we write our chapters, right? Each chapter should have a bit of, and then you won't believe what happened next. And then you're like, what happened next? And you start turning the page, right? It keeps the reader hooked. Some people do that with the books. They leave the end of the book very open-ended. It literally just stops mid-story, and it continues on in the next book. I am not a fan of this. When I read a book, I want to read a book. I don't want to read chapter 1, right? Look back to the Harry Potter series. Each book was a book. It had a beginning, a middle, and end. Now, was there a continuing story through line going through all 7 books? Yes. Was everything wrapped up in one book? No. Very first book, the Sorcerer's Stone, they're like, why does Voldemort want me dead? The first question you ask is the first question I can't answer. We have to wait for book 2 for that. So, there were open questions, right? Book 4 ended with Voldemort returning and Cedric dead. But the book still had an end. It didn't just stop. And then the after, that kind of thing. So, I mean, there is a way to do that in a way that still makes the book feel like it's a complete book, in my opinion. Again, I'm not saying that what she did was wrong. I'm not saying what she did was bad writing. I'm saying what she did was a style that I don't agree with, that I'm not a fan of. I don't write my books that way, but that is my opinion. I'm just telling you my opinion. So that part was a little bit of a F you when I'm like, I'm listening to this. I want to know how this episode is going to wrap up. And it basically wraps up with her getting on her feet, getting her weapons, and like, time to go to war kind of thing. And I'm like, don't do that. I no. So yeah, I mean, it's fine to have unanswered questions that need to be answered in the next book, but it's again, my humble opinion, it's still nice to have the book kind of wrapped up in a nice, neat bow, and say, this is volume one. Again, just not a fan of that style, right? So that part didn't work for me. Another part that this is weird because it worked and didn't work at the same time. Because I mentioned the love triangle that she had between the doctor and the pasture. I was really digging that, and I kind of liked how she's kind of torn between these two guys, and um, they sort of have different issues in terms of like she's really more into the pastor, but the pastor seems to have some issues with touching her, probably because of the demon thing, right? So, but she was just in a hospital for a month because her fiance was killed. And I was like, that seems a little soon to be getting rebound. Now, at one point, she says, I don't even, I mean, at one point, she hangs a lantern on this and says, yeah, my fiance just died. I don't know if I'm ready for a long-term relationship. Yeah, I like him. I like him too. I'm not ready to commit to anybody. I just got out of the loony bin. What do we want me to do? So, I mean, they do hang a lantern on the fact that this is a little like much. Um, but if you can forgive the short timeline, it works. I just thought it was a little weird that she's still a little bit hung up on the fiance, and then she's kind of got this like this love triangle thing. I was going to say three-way. Well, not that kind of book. This kind of love triangle going. And like I said, I dug the love triangle. That worked. It just felt a little weird compared to mourning dead fiance and that kind of things. That it was a there were things like that where the continuity wasn't 100%. Like there's one point where she fights some demons. She's got big old scratch marks. She comes out of the house. The cop's like, "What happened to your face?" It's like, "Oh, I ran into a door." And then she goes to the hospital. Sees boyfriend doctor. Boyfriend doctor doesn't say a word about scratch marks on face that the cop noticed the chapter before. And I was like, shouldn't the doctor like be taking care of that? I would think. I mean, it was just a weird continuity break. And I mean, even if they like magically healed from like demon powers or something, I don't know. Shouldn't we at least mention that? I think I mean, that's a little nitpick, right? That was a little small little detail that just sort of um but the book, I think, to me was the strongest when she was in the mental hospital because she's being tormented by these demons. They're actually attacking her to make it look like she's self-harming herself to try to keep her in the hospital. And so she's like sneaking medical supplies to bandage herself up so she can hide the fact that the demons are trying to make it look like she's doing that to herself. All that to me was a much more interesting part of the book than the detective story, right? Because she gets out, she gets back to work. Um, and I'm not trying this on this. It was a good, solid detective story, supernatural detective story. I dug it, um, but it did feel like that first part in the hospital was a more interesting story uh, than the rest of it. it was a different story at that point. Once she gets out of the hospital and she gets back to work, it does feel like there's a different like vibe, right? Um, Now it's no longer a question of is she imagining things or these creatures that are trying to make her look like she's crazy. Now they're just adversaries at that point. Supernatural adversaries, okay, still cool, right? Still with you. But yeah, I think her being in the mental hospital would have been a much more interesting story. I could imagine that as a whole book in of itself. I think that would have been a stronger story myself. That's just me. Um, but yeah, no, like I said, I dug it. I had fun with it. Um, Again, ending was not my style. Not necessarily saying it was bad, just not what I like in a book. Um, and again, having a really strong female heroine, a good grounded Scully meets Buffy kind of vibe to her. Um, Really good, strong book. I would recommend checking it out. Again, that is The Breeding by Avily Jerome. This is book 1 of the Jack Davidson case files. So that's it for this week. I know we're going to keep it short. I got a lot of things going on. Next week, we should have a little something special for you. So tune in for that. Not January, September 27th. Don't get old. Getting old sucks. It is hard when you have to start. Can't, like, make a sentence. And every time I talk, I sound like a politician making a speech. And they stormed the imprints, the big towers over there. Yeah, that's what they stormed. Getting old sucks. September 27th, I will be in Sacramento for the Sinister Book Fair. After that will be a busy October. We will have Son of Monsterpalooza in the middle and LA Comic Con at the end. So it's going to be a very busy end of September, October for me. So yeah, I expect episodes to start dropping because I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to pull both of those off. So until next week, keep on reading.